Welcome into another edition of SEC Football and Beyond. It is Tuesday, December the 8th. We're almost through this nightmarish year of 2020. We got like 23 days left. I would say what could possibly go wrong from here, but I don't want to tempt the 2020 gods. I want to just kind of press on. I'm Neil McCready, Chris Landry with me as well. We'll be with you for about an hour here, and then we'll rejoin you on Friday morning for another episode of SEC Football and Beyond and preview an SEC slate this week that does not include Ole Miss at Texas A&M. That game postponed. Ole Miss has suspended, Chris, all football operations through at least Friday. I don't like the word at least because at least indicates that it could go on even longer. It's one of the stories that I'm kind of keeping an eye on already here on this Tuesday morning with some 11 days to go before Ole Miss is scheduled to play at LSU. I'm beginning to sense the early stages of concern about that game. But we'll talk about that and a lot of other things here on the show today. First, how are you?
I am doing well. I was kind of dreading this time frame where we get to the point to where, we can say we postpone it. I'm leery about postponing. It's like nobody wants to use the C word, but explain to me a scenario where we can play that game, because we could play it next week. That means LSU Ole Miss doesn't get played, but we're running out of time unless they completely go against what they said and somehow play on the 26th, whatever. Yeah. I mean, we know that the amended calendar is the 19th. And so now we can't have a postponed game, which we do, but we can't have it and still get it in unless we cancel the next week's game. So all 71-ish games, we're not going to get all of them in. We're right now, safe to say we're going to be -1 at least.
At least. And then there's another storyline at Vanderbilt about Vanderbilt.
Yes.
Didn't play last week. I don't know that. And look, it's going to there's a convenient excuse, and I'm going to piss some people off here, and so be it. That's what I do. There's a convenient excuse that Vanderbilt might not get games in because of COVID. If you want to blame this on COVID, go for it. Have at it. That's cool. It's an easy thing to hide behind. Their issue right now is not COVID. Their issue right now is maybe the word mutiny is too strong. Player unrest is not too strong. They don't have many players that are still engaged, and their game this weekend against Tennessee, I'm curious if it gets played. I'm curious if they make up the Georgia game. Georgia lost senior day on that last week. They'd like to do that on the 19th. So there's a lot here, and I don't know. But I tell you where I want to start, Chris. I want to start right there in Baton Rouge. There's 3 or 4 stories that I want to get to today. I know what you are good at is that you know everybody. You really do. You can be modest and say you don't, but you know generally everybody. You've got connections into just about every program. You're certainly connected with that LSU program right there in your backyard. LSU lost to Alabama 55-17. That score didn't surprise me. I wrote in my picks column on Thursday, the line was 28. I said, I'd lay 28. I'd lay 38. I said, hell, I'd think about laying 48. I knew Alabama had that game circled. I knew it was a mismatch. I knew LSU has some internal issues. I knew all of those things combined. I knew Alabama was going to line up and kick LSU's ass, and they did. But in the wake of that predicted ass kicking, Eric Gilbert appears to be on the verge of opting out and transferring, entering the transfer portal. Read a story just this morning from Brody Miller of The Athletic, quoting a source at LSU who said he's very, very homesick. What are we supposed to do about that? Basically, it's paraphrasing a little bit. This is a football team that very clearly is not playing for its coach. One thing that stuck out to me, and I'll stop talking and let you have at it. The one thing that stuck out to me on Saturday night, so for background, my son Carson had a soccer game here in Oxford on Saturday mornings. I went to that game, and at halftime, when that game ended, I got back home and I turned on Missouri and Arkansas. Turned that on, and they were playing in the second quarter, and I was flipping between Missouri and Arkansas, Texas A&M and Auburn. And what I saw in that Missouri-Arkansas game were two teams that left it all on the field. There was nothing left. You know, Missouri kicks the game-winning field goal, the last play, and you see some of the Arkansas kids just kind of sitting on the bench staring aimlessly into space. Those kids cared. Those kids left it on the table. Great game. And you and I talked about it. We said this is going to be an entertaining game. If you just want to pick a game to watch that you don't care anything about, this is going to be a good one. And by God, it was. Those kids play hard for Eli Drinkwitz, and those kids at Arkansas play really hard for Sam Pittman. Can't take it away from them. Texas A&M got a body check from Auburn and then controlled the fourth quarter of that game in a way that had to make Jimbo Fisher – it had to move it, if you know what I mean. I mean, he had to be thinking, this is what I want my program to look like. And it took a little while to get there, but here we are, like you said at the beginning of the year. And then that night, I watched Alabama LSU. And Alabama's offense is spectacular. Jones is terrific. Devonta Smith might be the best player in college football. I love Najee Harris. They're good up front. Their scheme is Sarkisian has a brilliant scheme. They're fun to watch. But what I saw on the other sideline was chaos. And as that game progressed, with some exceptions, I saw a group of kids that were just ready to get the hell out of there. And it kind of shows a little bit right now here in the aftermath of that game, these rumors that a lot of guys, including Eric Gilbert, who was the big superstar cherry on top of the year that was last year, saying, I'm good. I'm out.
Yeah. I think you're hitting on something. I think what Neil's really hitting on is a big overview as you're talking. How do I phrase it? Because there's so much in limited time, and there's a lot that I could address and go with. In general.
How about it? I'll steer you. Go ahead.
I think there's one thing that is probably not as understood, Neil, and I think you've been around it, but a lot of people quite don't get is when things go well, people think, boy, they got it rolling now. It's good. I don't think people realize how difficult it is to manage success. I've been a part of it at the college level, and I'll give you a quick example in the NFL. When I go to Houston, with Belichick in Cleveland, go run the combine for a couple of years, get an opportunity to go to Houston. We inherit the worst roster in the league because it had to be torn down because it's before the start of free agency. We go in and build it up into a team that went to a Super Bowl. And you think, man, you got it going. Neil and folks, you would not believe there was so much ego with people trying to take credit for this success. And I mean, to the point where we had a club president that was brought in to oversee things, which he just came in, had nothing to do with drafting any of the players. He wasn't even there. He started the summer of that year. And I'm going to get to why is the hell are you talking about this? This is the whole point. He was there, and I remember forgetting the victory parade, which I didn't bother going to. I was so frustrated as we finished a yard chart with the Kevin Dyson play of who was a fight over the microphone. I mean, we're talking about 58, 62-year-old men. Who's going to speak to the fans to get the pettiness? Okay, so what does this really mean? It is why people don't give enough. And I know you're going to say, what? This is all everybody ever says. You don't know how good the Belichicks and the Sabans of the world are. And yeah, I'm prejudiced in that I've been around those guys, and I would not have had, my football background kind of grow the way it did if it not been for those two guys. You don't know how tough it is to keep, Alabama gets all the players. No, Alabama doesn't always get all the players historically. They do it because of the focus of details and the constant don't rest on what you did today. Because if you're talking about what you did today, you're not planning on what you're going to do tomorrow. LSU last year, there's no question they deserve all the credit. Building what they did, it worked, and a lot of people can have a great day, a great game, a great season. But to sustain success is difficult. Everyone will throw it out as, they lost all those players and they lost their coaches. We should have expected it. No. What you should have expected out of LSU this year, that they probably would have gone 7-3. You know what I mean? Not as good. Quarterback's not as good. New coordinators, it's not as good.
Which would have equated to a 10-3 season.
Yeah.
Sure.
What Neil's talking about is the collapse. This is a full-on free-fall collapse.
Yes.
What's happened, why it's happened. Well, let's go back. And I know it's a little thing, but it is symbolic. What did we talk about? What did everybody talk about last week leading into the LSU-Alabama game? Remember when Ed was in the locker room saying, "Roll Tide, what? Bleep you?" Well, that's kind of, you can say certain things, but there was a feeling and a permutation through that program that, we arrived. Did you see that? We beat them on their field. Somehow they got it in their mind that meant that they had arrived. You don't ever arrive. In this game, it's the ultimate humbling sport. If you don't work your butt off today, then what you've done is all you're going to ever do, and you're not going to sustain it because there's somebody else coming after you harder. And there was a belief that they had arrived, because what was the comment after the Roll Tide bleep you was, we're going to beat them in recruiting. We're going to beat them on the field. No, sir, you won the game.
Yeah.
And then you haven't, recruiting was this. We lost all these players.
No, he wrote a big check with his mouth, and
he sure did.
And
let me just tell you what else he did. And again, this is how you want to handle it. He made so many veiled and coded shots at Dave Aranda. Dave Aranda wasn't fired. He left to go to Baylor. But, again, Ed. Now, personalities. Now, you don't always have to be like Bill or Nick, how good your team's going to be this year. Well, Alabama's going to be good. I don't know. This team has to develop their own identity. Look, this team hadn't done anything, they last year's, Ed was, it's great. I mean, he made the famous comments in the spring. This defense is already better than last year. You didn't have a spring practice. My God, how could you even have? He talks everything like he talks recruiting. Hi, Neil McCready. How's the best receiver in college football? And then, and he'll call and say, Joe, how you doing, man? AC video. How's the best receiver? He's always on that. He's always a hype machine. Well, that permutates. He had decided he wanted Bo Pelini. That's who he wanted. He went out and got him. And Bo was the same personality. And I told everybody there, I said, you're talking about two guys, type A personalities, that are going to butt heads. There's going to be crash and burn. And what did Bo Pelini? Bo Pelini came in, and from the very first day to the players that were on the defense, he basically said, hey, I'm here now. What you did means nothing. He basically diminished the great season that everybody had. And yes, it was more about the offense, but let's remind folks that defense did a pretty good job against Oklahoma and Clemson. Oklahoma and Clemson, they played pretty good situationally. So they had players on that team, quote unquote, leaving early for the draft. And people say, well, they can't keep them. You know why? Because they were disrespected. They didn't feel like they were going to be given a chance. And that's all part of it. You're not good enough for us now. What you did is not worthy, and we're going to be at a different level, and it hasn't worked. the passing game coordinator, Scott Linehan, hasn't worked. Look, we've been through this before. Ed hired Matt Canada. It was a disaster. Look, give Ed credit. He didn't find Joe Brady. Okay, Steve Ensminger did. The LSU offensive coaching staff quickly wanted to improve, and one of the things they were told to do is, hey, let's study what the Saints are doing. No better staff, offensive minds than right down the road in New Orleans, 70 miles. So the staff comes in, and the guy that ended up running the clinic was Joe Brady. And Steve Ensminger was so impressed that this guy can help. Now, Joe Brady was like third on the totem pole amongst just analysts and involved. That he said, we need to bring this guy in to help us. And Steve Ensminger, with the close relationship with Ed, basically pushed that, got that hired, and it worked. And it was a great year. And you had a lot of great talent, and you had a great quarterback and leader in Joe Burrow. But this is what you have. When you have a head coach that it is not strong on the offensive or defensive side, is not a great X's and O guy, and is just more motivator recruiter, then who he hires is going to be more hit and miss, because usually the best head coaches are the ones that have become good coordinators, because good coordinators coach half the side of the ball, and there's no better evaluator of offensive coordinators than defensive coordinators. No better evaluator of defensive coordinators than offensive coordinators, because that's who they study all the time. And so Ed's inability to create consistency is due to the fact that he's limited in some of the things he can do, and the fact that he's created an atmosphere that, quite frankly, was very laissez-faire. Would he kept mouthing off about they worked hard, they did this and that? Well, they hadn't worked. So everything you said, they lost a lot of talent. They're not as well coached, but they've got players. You said players are quitting. I got news for you, folks. There were players that have been quitting since before the Mississippi State game. And then
let me ask you this. I'm gonna for a minute.
Yeah, because I kind of went where I wanted.
There's a lot of talk from people around that program who don't really know how to get into it, because it's getting into the PC stuff and it's getting into conversations that make people uncomfortable, and I get it. But in the summer, when there was so much, for lack of a better word, civil unrest regarding race relations, police brutality, those topics that in this year in this 2020, that was a big part of the summer of 2020, there was a march in Baton Rouge, like there was a march in Oxford and a march in Tuscaloosa and a march in a lot of places. And Ed Orgeron wasn't there with the players. He got called to join them, and he did. But I've heard from people close to that program that he lost a lot of guys in the summer and really hasn't gotten them back. They didn't feel like he had their back. I mean, here, Lane Kiffin was, I don't know what Lane Kiffin's thoughts were, but his actions were, he was right there at the front with them. They wanted to cancel a practice, and he said, all right, here's the deal. It's going to be two ways. Okay, we'll cancel the practice. This was on a Friday. We'll march to the square and we'll do whatever. But now look, Sunday was going to be an off day, and I'm getting my day back because we got a football season to get ready for at the same time. I acknowledge that we're all humans with individual thoughts and opinions and rights, but we're also a football team. And at Ole Miss, that went over really well inside that program. At Alabama, you saw, hey, we're going to schedule this, we're going to do it right, and there's Nick Saban in the front of the line. At LSU, you didn't get that. And so what you had is you have this deal where he's lost his team. And I have a question, and this is where I want you to go with this. I've yet to see a coach lose a team and get it back. But you've been around it a lot more than I have. So moving this thing forward, let's assume that Eric Gilbert's leaving. Let's assume that at the end of this season, Bo Pelini's going to have to call a real estate agent. That's not going to work. Let's assume that Ed Orgeron obviously gets another year. And let's assume, for the sake of our own sanity, that next season is more, quote, normal, end quote, than this year was. Can Ed Orgeron turn this thing back around?
I think the big thing to remember is what I talked about is judgment, decision making from the head coach. When you are maybe lacking in some of those qualities, then the decisions that are going to ultimately answer your question are up in the air. So my point is you're correct on the whole marching of the situation. LSU, like most, went to the White House. This was before the pandemic broke. I mean, so they went to the White House and celebrated. And, just for whatever reason, Ed Orgeron and there's a couple of, people in the Senate that were close with Trump and, LSU guys. And so whatever, they hit it off, Ed and Donald Trump. And my understanding is that actually when the pandemic hit in the summer, Donald Trump was actually called Ed. And so it became like they were buddies. Well, I mean, I don't know if they were buddies, and I don't think Ed knew how to deal with it. And so, obviously if the president calls, you take the call.
Sure.
But I think what happened with it, he didn't handle it well behind the scenes to where you're correct. The players thought, whoa, this guy's a hypocrite because this guy's love us, we're family and all that. And they obviously, regardless what anybody else thinks, folks, the players that you're recruiting and coaching, they're thinking completely different politically than maybe the head coach is, probably in 95% of the cases. And yet, Ed was kind of, my understanding is that the players, that they didn't really want Ed involved in their they didn't believe that he believed them.
Yeah.
It's just, I think he did begin to lose some of the respect of his team. And I don't think we ever saw it. Then you throw in, like you always do, it's a chicken egg thing. When you lose all the talent, you lose all the coaching, you got new people, and you got new people Bo Pelini's there to try to improve his image and get another bite at the apple at the head coaching job. Which is nothing wrong with that, but he doesn't give a darn. If Bo Pelini was the defense coordinator last year, LSU doesn't win a national title because he can't adjust and be eclectic like a Dave Aranda. Bo only knows one thing. And no, Bo hasn't got the defense better this year. It was just that it was so god-awful at the beginning of the year that it hadn't sucked quite as much in certain games. But that's only relative to the opponents that they're playing.
Right.
And what their capabilities are in the environment. If they play a little better against A&M than Alabama, well, yeah, because A&M's got two guys that can get open against coverage. Alabama's got a bunch. Okay? Simple as that. So now what you've got is a series of decision makings that are very questionable, that haven't worked. And now to answer your question, you got a big time mess because on top of all this, there's NCAA investigations into the program, which they've put their own sanctions on, which we'll see what the NCAA says about that. And also there's more serious allegations, which all I know is what I hear. I've got really good friends. My best friend is a professor and very involved in the athletic program, that they're really concerned because what has happened in this whole, sexual assault, that I just keep thinking the comments keep mention to me is Baylor.
Yeah.
Sounds like Baylor.
Yeah.
Sounds like our Baylor. Now, I don't know, and I'm not here to, I'm not a rumor guy and this stuff. I don't know what happened, but there's an investigation going on. And so on top of all of this is, they say by February, this independent investigation will be made out. The group that's doing it's the same guy that did the investigation into the Dolphins when there was the bullying, and then the same group. I mean, it'd be like $400,000 to. That's a great job. Lawyers get together and write a 700-page report, and that's what's going to come. And then what comes out of that? Well, we don't know. It's good. So look, I mean, it is not without question that there could be a firing down the road with cause. To answer your question, can they fix it? Well, is he going to make is he going to hit on the right hire? I listen, the only thing that's saving.
I'd be reluctant to work for him right now.
Well, I think that would be true. But Scott Linehan is getting a pass. I mean, the Scott Linehan's best friend is Bo Pelini, because Bo Pelini's getting beat up, rightly so. But Scott Linehan hadn't done a very good job either. And, there's a lot of questions there. So you got some major issues in what's going to be addressed, how it's going to be addressed, how it works. It's easy to say, and people will do this is, oh, it's expected. It's just, no, there's a lot more there. So this is not just a simple of, look, you lost some guys, you lost some coaches, they'll get it fixed, turned around next year. If it does, and he hits it right, it can happen. I mean, it can happen, to answer your question. It's just how likely. I mean, I would say the probabilities are low. Now, I would say that the probabilities are that it won't be quite the disaster as it is this year. But, there's the talk that I heard yesterday with the few calls that I got was, the Ole Miss ad has arrived. That was the talk within the athletic department. Ole Miss ad arrived. He's arrived.
What do you look like?
Yeah, and you throw in that the breakdown again. Any one of these situations by themselves, not the worst thing in the world. Maybe a little, but all of it together shows a complete lack of composure, complete lack of understanding. The headset was a one thing, but let me give you this. If this doesn't put it in perspective, the question was, why wasn't Stingley on Devontae Smith? Well, I thought he was going to be. Stingley came to me. This is Ed's exact quote. Stingley came to me at halftime and said, I want to be on Devontae Smith. That's a good idea. Let's do it. Say, let that sink in.
Yeah.
That the head coach is solely. Now, again, Ed is not a technical football guy, but you certainly have got to understand that. You certainly have to, and that's the problem. The coordinators and the coaches, a lot of them love Ed, but they don't respect his football acumen. So then that becomes when you don't really respect, and was the problem with Aranda. Aranda was very polite and respectful, but when Ed would leave the room, then Aranda did what he needed to do, and Bo will sit there and it'll be combative, and you saw that it's not gotten better. It's got contentious, and everything with Ed is about how it's going to look, how it's going to affect my recruiting. And so he'll sit there and answer those questions, and he'll say, we got to coach better. We're not really good. Well, the staff is saying, what the bleep do you know? You don't even know what we're running and why, and then you don't even know that Stingley's not on him, and it's like you throw your headset because you figured out we're not. It's like that's the level of dysfunction that's there, and how do you fix that? Well, yeah, it's fixable. Everything's fixable, Neil. The issue is, can Ed fix it?
So
I think that's a big question.
Let's switch gears. Let's go to another impending decision that has to be made, and this one's at Auburn. Auburn loses to Texas A&M 31-20. It was a much more respectable effort on the part of the orange and blue Tigers than the purple and gold Tigers had later in the day, but it was a loss nonetheless. And Gus Malzahn made a comment, Chris, that is probably going to haunt him. He said, hey, and I'm paraphrasing, it was a solid season. We've had a solid season. And you and I have talked about perception and reality a bunch. Where I'm different than a lot of people is I'm of the opinion, and I always do this in recruiting. If you're recruiting a kid and the kid thinks hey, I'm 3 and done to the NFL. Even if you think internally, you know what, he's probably going to need more development time, blah, 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 blah. But you want that kid, you've got to recruit him as if he's a 3 and done straight to the NFL guy, because his perception, at least at that moment, is reality. So at Auburn, the perception of the Auburn fan base, and they fill up Jordan-Hare, and they come to games, and they're passionate, and they love it. There are a few fan bases made up more of alumni and people close to alumni who love a place more than Auburn. And their perception is we should compete every year for the SEC title, compete for it. And we should be almost every year part of the national conversation. Now, you, Chris, can go, well, that's not realistic. And I don't care. My response to that is you're not. You and I, even if we think, man, that's insane, we're not going to change their opinions. Their opinions are rooted in love and connection and family and all of that stuff. And it is what it is.
And the success up the road, down the road,
but
across the road.
Auburn has had success. Auburn has won Heisman trophies. Auburn has won national titles. Auburn has played for a national title as recently as 2013, et cetera, et cetera. That is their perception. It might as well be reality. And when you look at where they are today, that's not where they are today. They got blown out by Alabama. They got blown out by Georgia. They lost in pretty convincing fashion in the fourth quarter to Texas A&M. They had a stinker at South Carolina. They're very fortunate that they beat Arkansas, and they're kind of fortunate that they beat Ole Miss this season. And they still got to go to Mississippi State. But for the sake of this conversation, because I think if he loses in Starkville, it might just be too much. Let's say that they go to Mississippi State and win. They're a 10-point favorite-ish. Let's say they go to Mississippi State and win. 6-4 Auburn. Its best win of the season probably at Ole Miss. Is that enough to save Gus Malzahn's job? And if you're the one making the decisions at Auburn, what do you do?
Well, we were talking before I think this was before we clicked on, we were talking about leverage of agents. Gus has been, in my opinion, done at Auburn for a while. I know that sounds weird. My point is the only thing that saved him was the rumored interest, the perceived interest, the real interest, depending on degree and who it is at Arkansas in Gus. So what happened was a rudderless ship at Auburn at the time. There was nobody running it. There was, basically the president, no athletic director, and there was a void at the top. And so they gave Gus a humongous contract. That's the only thing keeping him there. I think Gus is gone. Let me remind you, Gus was gone as soon as the LSU game when Les Miles was fired. That was loser go home game. You remember that? Go back 3 years ago, folks. Yeah. That Gus would have been gone. The only thing holding Gus there, the frustration has been the same. I don't even think the people that have made the decision to give him that extension, they were in a panic because the last thing that president wanted to do is hire a coach because he didn't know what he was doing. He didn't have it at the late. So the simplest thing was, let's get this pushed to proof. And a lot of them, he had a couple of people that supported him, and most of the boosters said, hell no, don't do that. But he did it, and he got it done. And that's the only thing. That's the hanging by the thread, and he's been hanging by a thread for a long time. I think money is the only thing keeping him there. So the answer is, if somebody wants to write the check, I mean, that search can begin tomorrow. Do you want to? I mean, it's easy to say. It's everybody say, oh, they'll write the check when it's somebody else's money. Yeah, you can give them the pen. To me, Gus has been gone for a while. He will be gone. It's only a matter of time. I just don't know, at this point, again, and we say this, what does the portfolio look for the people that are going to write the check? Do they really Are they motivated to write a check now, or they just say, "The hell with it, I'm going to wait"? I don't know.
So I'm going to interrupt you. I hear that they are.
Well, I think some are, but do they have enough?
So
We'll see.
that's what I want to get into, though. What I want to get into, because
Okay.
we could talk about the games last week. The games last week were the games last week. I mean, they were played Saturday. You've seen them. You've looked at them. We'll get to the games this week on Friday. Grind is one of he's an Auburn guy. He comes over to our Oxford Exxon podcast all the time.
Grind, how are you?
Grind's a great dude. Calls into our call-in show on Thursday night. Awesome guy. His little avatar there is a little guy hurling rocks or bricks or whatnot. I guess he's hurling bricks at anyone who tries to say that Auburn needs to keep Gus. So let's say let's say that Grind gets his wish and that Auburn moves on from Gus Malzahn, because obviously if they don't, we can talk about that at another day. Rock Westfall says the problem is who you're going to get. And I don't know that I'd go that far with the problem, but it's not the problem, but it becomes immediately. Let's say you move on from Gus Malzahn at 2:01 on Sunday afternoon. At 2:02, it's no longer Gus Malzahn's issue. Now you got to find somebody who's going to come in and get you to that place. How attractive is the Auburn job in the coaching community today? Who are some realistic names that they could go get? And I'll throw one at you that I've heard already, and that's Mario Cristobal at Oregon. Would that be a fit? Would that make sense?
Well, first of all, I think Auburn's a really good job. I think it's a really, really good job. And Ben Leslie, love you, man. You looking for some love? I give you some love. You are the man. I appreciate all of you. Rock, Spartan Barton, all of you. I know we don't get to all of you as much as you should. It's a really good job. I will say this. I've always said this. It's a really tough job for obvious reasons. One, you're correct. They expect to. And the other thing that I should, to give Gus credit, the other thing that's kept him alive is he has beaten Nick a couple of times.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, the money, and because if he doesn't beat him, and then they don't even get to the point where they even pay him the money, but it's all together. I mean, you know what? So it's a great job, but you're going to have to play Georgia every year. And it used to be where, if you were Alabama, you'd say, man, I got to play Tennessee every year. Look how good they are. They're top over there, and they're not now. They got to play Georgia every year, and they got to play Alabama. And it's just, of all the people that get compared to Alabama, and I mean, it's LSU, they have the inferiority complex to Alabama. Auburn does, the little brother, we're not Alabama, we're Auburn. Well, you've had some success against that. That's pretty tough. Say, you don't win those games, they get really ticked off at you. So, I mean, but those are two tough games that good luck anybody winning them. I mean, you can say that, Georgia's certainly not where Alabama is, but they're pretty doggone good. So in a normal year, in a 12 game, I mean, 10-2 is a phenomenal season if you're at Auburn, and maybe you can go 11-1. But that means, oh, by the way, you always have to beat LSU. You always have to beat A&M. You always have to beat an Ole Miss and Mississippi State. And if you end up playing a Florida, oh yeah, you of course got to beat him. Well, hey, good luck. Now, there's only one person that does that. There's only one school that does that, and that's Alabama. Consistently, we've just had that. So it's a tough job. I mean, it's a great job. The expectations are there. The money's there. You can have anything you want, but you're expected to maybe be Alabama. Look, you can do it. Tuberville did it, but Tuberville did it when Alabama wasn't Alabama. I think it's a much better job when Nick Saban leaves, and maybe it's not as same Alabama. It's still very good. The other thing about Auburn is everybody's got their politics. All politics are local. Everybody's got their unusual quirkiness. I don't even know how to describe Auburn's quirkiness, and I don't know that many people are as quirky as Auburn. And what I mean by that, I don't mean to be vague, but and it's changed because it used to be the Bobby Lauder run program, but it's like different, but still kind of screwy. Like I don't know. It's kind of like maybe not that I've ever been there, but maybe it's like the conclave when they're selecting a pope. I mean, it's like um, Cardinal Rasponi and Cardinal, they're meeting and they're going to decide this, and all of a sudden it has a weird tone to it that I don't know what they would do. Like normal protocol for, because I do a lot of coaching search. It's like off the radar what they want to do.
Yeah.
It's like, and he did a good job, but he didn't sustain it. But they were hell bent. Gene Chiswick's our guy, and there is nobody else we want. Okay. I mean, have at it. I mean, it's one of those things. Like, in other words, you think Auburn can do better because it's a really good job, but they tend to want a certain guy.
All right, so let me throw a name at you then, because you didn't take the
oh, okay.
You didn't take the bait on Mario Cristobal.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me answer that. Here's my thing on Mario. Look, I've got a little concerned about him because Mario has been a guy that's been floated out as potentially for Texas. He's been floated out
potentially as Nick.
Maybe as Nick said. We'll see. Sark continues to run these offenses and stays there for a few more years. Got to throw him into the mix. Who knows?
Sure.
I'm a little bit concerned about Mario. I don't want to be the recency bias, but man, big game performances hadn't been real good with him. It just
all right, so let me get to another guy.
But he certainly would be an interesting guy. Really good recruiter and can do a lot of damage, and one of the best assistants that Nick has had. And I think he's done a good job at Oregon, but great job. I don't know. I would put him on the list, but I'd want to look at some other guys.
Okay, so that I know a lot of people close to Hugh Freeze.
Yeah.
I'm told that Hugh Freeze has his eye on 2 SEC jobs. People that told me this would absolutely know. Hugh Freeze has his eye on Auburn, and Hugh Freeze has his eye on Tennessee.
Yeah.
2 jobs that could potentially open up in the next 10 days. I mean,
and let me jump in there and say, is Hugh Freeze, does he fit the category? I mean, I could see this. Well, I could see 2 guys all in on Hugh Freeze, and I could see boosters, and I could see 2 of them saying, no way in hell over my dead body. I mean, this is what I'm getting at. So would that be what they want to do? So my assessment, first of all, is there's a little bit of a and I told this to South Carolina folks, look, and I'm happy for Shane, and that's great, but I'm just saying, Hugh Freeze is not for you. You're probably going to coach against him. And I think there is a little bit of that right now. And I think Auburn may feel like, let's say they are okay with Hugh Freeze, that they feel he's their guy.
Okay.
They may think, you know what? Tennessee's probably a year away. Maybe we get to go now, or LSU may be a year or 2 away. And does that? I don't know that people are going to be like throwing their coaches over the bus to get Hugh Freeze. You've brought up something that I think is fair on you. First of all, Hugh Freeze fit. He drives Nick nuts because offensively, Nick Saban, the whole reason why he went out and got a Lane Kiffin is that he just was perplexed by what Hugh was doing offensively. And once he realized that the rules weren't changing and they weren't going to call those penalties of blocking down the field, I got to get me some of that. Okay. And Hugh Freeze is the main reason. He gave him trouble. The issue is, and I think you would be good on that. You brought it up. And to be honest with you, the more you brought it up, the more I thought about it. And I kind of went back and read. The one thing about you, does you have that head coach touch, putting the staff together, keeping the staff together? Can can he? I don't mean stay out of trouble for the what reasons, but can he consist? I think they can recruit. Don't give me this. Why anybody can recruit at Auburn? No, picking the right players, putting the right staff together. Can he manage that as well? Running the offense, you got that fixed. I think it would be a real interesting hire, and I think it, quite frankly, selfishly, I kind of like to see it, and I think it could cause Alabama a lot of trouble. But does it transform it? Does he have the leadership qualities to build a power at Auburn? I think it's a fair question, and that's what they would have to answer on him.
To your point about that Auburn culture, and I covered Auburn as a beat writer for years. I covered Auburn as a columnist for another 4 or 5. I lose track. Auburn does look for a certain type of personality. Yeah. Auburn does look like they do look for people with Auburn ties. Now, Hugh had a daughter that went to Auburn for a little while. Maybe that's enough of a tie. I don't know. But Hugh doesn't strike me as Hugh strikes me as much more of a fit at Tennessee, just on the surface, than he does at Auburn, because I know how Auburn is a little bit, and Auburn is, like if you get we took a visit to Auburn, my daughter and I did. She was looking at Auburn when she was picking schools, and they talk about an Auburn man and an Auburn woman, and they talk about the, and I don't mean this disrespectfully at all. It's just different. They talk about the Auburn creed and all of that stuff. Auburn's different. It's different, and so I don't know that he fits there. And then I'm telling you, with Hugh, he's got to go someplace where the athletic, this is where I think actually Tennessee, if Phil Fulmer could stomach it, I think Phil could help Hugh. I don't know that this is an Allen Green sort of guy where you bring in Hugh Freeze. Can you help him put together the kind of staff that you have to have at Auburn to max out at Auburn? You got to have a great staff because you got to recruit at a really high level. You got to be able to go evaluate at a really high level. You've got to be able to get into Georgia and beat Kirby Smart. You've got to get down into Florida and win some of those battles that Auburn traditionally has won at like Dillard High School in Fort Lauderdale. You've got to be able to go to those places. You got to recruit the hell out of the Mobile area, the Montgomery area. You've got to be able to step into Mississippi and get a player here and there, which is going to be harder and harder to do. It's a difficult deal. I think Tennessee's a better fit for him. And I don't know what's going to happen to Tennessee. I mean, if Tennessee and Vanderbilt play this weekend, and I don't know that that's likely, and we're going to get to that in a second. I don't know that game's going to happen. But if it does, note to Jeremy Pruitt, you probably should try to win this one.
Look, couple of things. You're right. That Auburn family, it's almost like you gotta go there in the interview and have a roll of toilet paper and say, I just came from Tumor. It's like, you're right. It's like, it's almost, that's a good way to put it. Almost religious, almost like it's almost like you have to have been there to come back. Like, a lot of it is, a lot of people there would say, I'd like Kevin Steele. Okay. Kevin's a good coach. And it's like, you probably can get somebody that has more proven as a head coach, but the fit, I think they're guys that would be a really good fit.
You mentioned Steele. I can tell you that there are people at Auburn who would. There are people at Auburn right now today. I can tell you this, Chris, sourced. There are people at Auburn that right now today would love to just pay Malzahn to go away and hand the program to Kevin Steele.
No, well, that's why I said it. I mean, they're because he's been there as one of them, and he understands. That's exactly what I'm saying. That's what I said. The people there, a lot of them would like Kevin. And my point is that if you're Auburn, there's some really good proven coaches that, if I were doing it, it would be different because I'm not doing it with the idea of you have to be the whole. I got that when, pushing Saban to go to LSU was, well, he's a Midwest guy. That BS. And you don't have to sound a certain way. Somebody that would be a great coach and would build a culture and would do things and be somebody like a Tom Allen at Indiana. He wouldn't be a fit. Probably wouldn't be a fit for him. Would they go and strike the iron at Iowa State again and go to get Matt Campbell. I don't know if they see him as a fit because they didn't have the previous Auburn connect. I mean, it's things like that very difficult. They're not difficult to project what Auburn's going to do because we know that's what Auburn does. But I think sometimes they limit themselves by the job itself on the outside is different than on the inside, meaning that it's a really good job, but they have some – they really are unique about who they want. So I think they would have. The other thing I'd said, Philip Fulmer ain't hiring Hugh Freeze. It's going to be somebody has to force Philip to hire him, or they're going to have to fire Philip. Because that's not. Philip doesn't like Hugh, and it goes back to recruiting and all that. But and other stuff, and then. I think Philip wants to have, quote unquote, where he's kind of the main guy. And I've said Philip is the biggest problem that they've got at Tennessee. Personally, I think that's the big issue. But I do agree with you. He'd be a better fit at Tennessee because I think they would be. I can tell you that would be where most of the people would want at Tennessee. And that doesn't make him the right fit, but I think he'd be a better fit with the Tennessee folks than he would be at Auburn, where, again, some may love him, some may hate him. And, that's difficult. And that's the problem in hiring an Auburn coach. It's a little bit different.
A couple of things to get to real quick. We don't have a lot of time, but we've got a minute. South Carolina does what we said last week they would do. I think we were on top of this when the momentum early was on Billy Napier. It shifted very quickly to Shane Beamer. Shane Beamer now the new head coach at South Carolina. Just your thoughts on that hire and that fit.
Spurrier pushed it. A lot of ex-players pushed it, and that's what got it done. Certainly he had been there before. That's why they pushed it. He had relationships with them. And so they look, I think they looked at Napier. First of all, they didn't see Hugh Freeze. If Hugh Freeze was never in it, because I said that's what I would do if I was South Carolina. It doesn't mean that they were considering it because they never really were.
They into it. They decided.
Yeah, they just
they didn't have the taste for it. I'm just going to tell you.
No.
They did not. They didn't have the. They didn't. They viewed that as too much distraction, and they just didn't. They never went far down that road at all.
No, and so with that being the case, it really was. Scott Satterfield got himself in a little trouble. They are very sensitive at Louisville about coaches going behind the back director. That's another podcast, another time and day. In and of itself. So it really came clearly Napier, and I think a couple of things. They felt like it was close, and I think because it was close and there was the pull from within from former players at South Carolina that had developed relationships with Shane when he was there, the support of Spurrier backing him, which, Spurrier back Muschamp too, but Spurrier still has a lot of respect and within it. That was the difference. In other words, they didn't think, when Napier's up here and Beamer, they thought it was close. And yeah, Napier's got coaching experience, but so that's how they made their decision. I can tell you that I got a text Saturday morning that Billy was meeting again with South Carolina, Billy Napier, and he really badly wanted the job. And I always feel bad because that was it was going into it for both of them. I knew one of them was going to really get hurt. It's like a episode of The Bachelorette, because it was like both of them really wanted the job because Shane wanted that. That was kind of like his dream job. And that was Billy's, his wife. It's unique because in addition to my normal contacts, he is the next door neighbor to my godchild, Billy and his wife. And so they were, she didn't want to go to Starkville. He didn't, last year. But she's, was an athlete at Furman. He was an athlete at Furman, coach and brother coach. going back to South Carolina was something I think they wanted, so
South Carolina took both Napier and Beamer to the fantasy suite before making a decision.
There you go. But only one got the rose. So I knew Saturday early this was coming, and then I kept hearing, when I had that, and he look, I'll be honest, he told me, so I think I can get it. And I'm like, well, okay, well, maybe he flipped, but I was like, before the meeting, I'm like, okay. And then, but I had kind of heard it was Shane. And then, this was like in the morning, and I think it was like maybe noon or something that Billy put the famous, it's flattering to be considered, but we got something great going on in Louisiana Lafayette. So anyway, that's I'm going to get into a little bit more details at LandryFootball.com of how that played out, as well as some Vanderbilt stuff that we're going to get to as well.
It'll be good stuff. Let's talk about Vanderbilt real quick. I'm hearing Jamie Chadwell's getting that job.
Yeah. By the way, Spartan Barton brought up something, and this is a little bit annoying. It did help that Shane Beamer was a little bit cheaper.
He had no buyout.
Yeah, and then the little cheaper part is, and I don't think they hired him on the cheap, folks. I think they liked them both.
Mm-hmm.
They had to push from within. And by the way, we can get them cheaper. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go ahead. What did you say about Jamie Chadwell?
Yeah.
Look, I talked to Clark Lee. I don't know what he's. I think that. I hope that he doesn't make that mistake. And and I say a mistake, if he wants to go there, that's his school, that's fine. I just think it's a career ender potentially. Very little chance that you can make it a stepping stone. Some have, but most don't. Jamie Chadwell is the type of guy that thinks he can go to Vanderbilt and do something at Vanderbilt nobody's ever. He's that type.
Yeah,
I think he's.
So let me ask this:
he's the type of guy that's going to go there, and then he's going to get there and go say ruh-roh.
So let me ask you this: so if you're advising Chadwell, are you telling stay there because
don't take this?
Hold on, he's an East Tennessee guy. Tennessee's got a real shot to open up. I would think a year from now would be on if he could maintain some momentum at Coastal Carolina. I would think a year from now he would be on the short list at Tennessee. Would you advise him to take that gamble and hang tight there in South Carolina for another year?
Yeah, because there's some other things that would interest him. I think he'd be very interested in I don't know that he would, if Dave Doran leaves, I think he'd love to go to NC State. I think he'd love, probably not Duke and Wake, and Duke's going to, Cut is not far away from handing it over.
Sure.
Wake is set, but I think there are other options. I think he's smart enough to know that Vanderbilt's a tough job. But here's the thing: just because you hear the names, they all like to have their names associated with it, and then they could always pull it out. It does help because you think these presidents and athletic directors are on top of everything. A lot of them are not, and a lot of them go on the idea of, man, Vanderbilt was interested. So-and-so was interested. I read where Tennessee might be interested down the road. So it helps you in the public perception of what is a good PR sale. Because a lot of what athletic directors and chancellors and people do is they think about how it's going to react PR-wise. I think they think too much of that. And I think sometimes they make a mistake doing that, but I think they do look at that. So Vanderbilt's an SEC job. No, I'm sorry. It is a job in the SEC, but it's not an SEC job. And so I think that's the issue. And I would really steer away from it unless I didn't have another option. But I don't know. Jamie may be the type that ego's enough to think he can make a difference there. I don't know. I don't think he's going to consider it, but we'll see.
Save the biggest story for last here. Louisiana Monroe moved on from Viator yesterday.
I know.
I have
thought about you.
I have applied for the job via Twitter. I'm an alum. I've deep family
Proud
ties
of them.
to ULM. If you were advising the people at ULM, how much money would you advise that they give me?
I really would break the bank. I would really look at maybe downsizing all the programs on campus and maybe cutting out, I don't know, maybe a third of the majors and just cutting off departments. I mean, do you really need math? I think I'd cut it down and I'd put all emphasis on upgrading facilities. And I'm thinking, really solid seven figures. I really am, deep into that. I'm thinking shock everybody, break the bank. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think too. I mean, you don't need math. Everybody's got a phone, right?
That's right. And then you got to calculate things on the phone. You don't need to bring your pocket calculator. You don't need that.
You don't need that.
I think it's highly overrated. I think that would be really good, and just build it on facilities. Everybody talks about, that football's the front porch to the house,
Yep.
The university. Do you really need the house if your front porch looks great? Maybe just hang out there. I just say, I'm thinking somewhere between Saban and Harbaugh is what I was thinking for you.
Yeah, I could live with that.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm gonna do this, something that the agents would tell me never to do this, Chris. I'm gonna give ULM a hometown discount. I'm gonna ask for half of Saban's money. That's it, half, because my heart will pay me the other half.
There you go. I mean, that's good. And maybe even save the math department.
Yeah.
What a humanitarian you are.
I don't think we need math in Monroe, and I don't think we need reading and writing in Monroe. I mean, everything's on audio.
We're going to get the calls from your hometown. I know it.
All right. We didn't even get to the games coming up this week. I'll just tell you real quick that we'll talk about it on Friday. We'll get you ready for Alabama at Arkansas, Georgia at Missouri, which actually could be an entertaining game. Tennessee at Vanderbilt, if it happens. I've got my doubts. LSU at Florida, which Kyle Trask going for the Heisman against that secondary. And then Auburn at Mississippi State, which I will tell you, there's a part of me that thinks that's going to be a really competitive football game on Saturday night. Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll talk about it Friday. Mississippi State's kind of played a little better lately, and Auburn's in a weird spot right there. So I got some wonders about where that game goes. But Grind says my heart is very rich. See? There you go.
There you go. We'll get to some of your questions there too after, if I can figure out how to do that. So Spartan Martman, what type of recruits are expected at Vanderbilt to boost his fans? They don't have a very eclectic curriculum. They've just got only a few things you can study there, and I think it's a sell for the really good student, but it is tough to recruit there, particularly with facilities so bad. It shows a lack of emphasis into football, which it clearly is there.
Yeah, and the deal with Sarah Fuller has created some issues inside that team that's got to get addressed. No matter what you think of that story, whether you think it's the most great thing in the world, or whether you think it's a publicity stunt, or whether you fall somewhere in between, the people that are that put that uniform on, that are trying to finish the season, they were not in love with the way that played out and the way that it's still playing out. And that was one of the big reasons, quite frankly, that the game at Georgia last weekend didn't happen. All right. We'll break it there. We'll be back with you on Friday morning. Thanks to everybody in the chat, Matt Browning and Ben Leslie and Grind and Spartan Barton.
Great job, guys. Awesome.
A lot of fun. We'll be back on Friday. So until then, for Chris Landry, I'm Neil McCready. Take care. Stay safe. Talk to you then. Bye.